You're tuned in to the Friday edition of Agriculture Today. Thanks for joining us, and the grain market trends, of course, are front and center during our first segment. The dominant topic, without question, the announcement that China will be imposing tariffs in retaliation for U.S. tariffs on China, and including a number of agricultural goods, principal among them, as was announced this week, soybeans. Dan O'Brien joining us in studio. He's a grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. Well, Dan, this had been sort of welling up for a while, it seems, and soybeans were finally put on the tariff list, and the market reaction initially, as you'd expect, but then things seem to have tamed down some. What's your take on all of this?
Yeah, there's the initial reaction, which, of course, was pretty negative. Even the markets themselves had moved sharply lower and mitigated some of that loss to close 25 or 28 cents lower. They had been trading 40 or so. This is sort of the last big ag card to lay on the table in these negotiations. And it's important, I think, to realize that this is an announcement of what would happen if negotiations that are anticipated to end in May don't end up with some type of an agreeable compromise for both parties.
That's important to reiterate. The tariffs are not in place yet. There's a month and a half window here.
I think probably the most thoughtful statement I've seen on this comes out of the leadership of the U.S. Grains Council. Tom Slight, chief officer of that group, had said that here we are at the high point of escalations, hopefully, and hopefully everyone will come to the realization that China needs U.S. products coming in, and the U.S. needs to be able to sell to China. When you look at the numbers, China has to import about 97 million metric tons of soybeans a year. They use about 111. This is in the 17-18 marketing year, and that's forecast to increase. They import about 97 million metric tons. And all of South America anticipated in the 17-18 marketing year to export about 85 million metric tons. So with that might move up some. So 97 versus 85. If China took all of South American soybeans, they'd still be short 12 million metric tons, or 10 or 12 if this happens. So what we've kind of touched off, I think, is a remix and shifting of the flows of soybeans. Now, 25% tariff on soybeans. What's that do? Well, if soybeans are about $10 in the world market, at least that's around where we're hanging, 25% of that's $2.50. So suddenly any soybeans that China would be looking at from the U.S. would now have basically net effective to buyers at their coasts, their processors, $12.50 instead of $10. So what does that do? Well, it puts the U.S. at a price disadvantage for those people out of China, those companies that are seeking to buy soybeans. So what do? The first place they go to South America, and that's a problematic deal for them this year. This isn't a year when both Argentina and Brazil have tremendous gangbuster, bin-buster crops. There's a significant drought in Argentina. So you've shifted then the focus of China's buying to Brazil. And we've seen reports that internal prices in Brazil have jumped quite a bit. Now they have logistical issues. Mm-hmm. And yes, they're working like crazy to overcome them. So suddenly if this business shifts, and we've seen market reports that it has from China to Brazil, they're suddenly trying to pull out of a situation where they already have port congestion and other issues. And heaven help them if they get a series of rains that get their roads muddy, or throw a port strike in, which tends to happen all these times. So they're pulling from there. China isn't the only buyer of soybeans in the world. They're about 65% or so, 65, 62, something like that. So suddenly you've got China with all its attention mainly at Brazil, because Argentina doesn't have that much. And the other buyers in the world see, gosh, that's pretty high prices, and we're not paying this tariff. So we'll come back to the United States. So you're reshifting the flow of business around. Overall, I think in the bigger picture, I even with that reshifting, still when you'll have added a tariff on to whatever China still has to buy from the U.S., you've raised the price of soybeans on the world market. And for buyers, some paying tariff, others not. And with that, you do cut back. There'll be some moderate to marginal decrease in the amount of soybeans sold on the market. And the price here domestically, if this holds up here in the U.S., it would have a negative impact on the soybean market in the United States. But is that 25 cents? Is that 50 cents? Is that $1? We don't know yet, but I don't think we're collapsing to the loan rate.
Right.
And we're not losing half the value of beans. We're trying to figure out, in terms of looking at how prices historically respond, how after this moving around and arbitrage shifting that would happen, where the market would settle out at. And the thing that I wonder on is, in going forward, I know what our initial response is. And we're concerned about what's happened in the soybean market, and we saw it on Wednesday as the markets dropped off. The market seemed to have dropped that day, came back some, and now sitting there thinking, well, just what is this thing going to be? And there's the realization in that these aren't finalized, they're signals. But even the signal, who's it affect? It really affects those Chinese companies trying to buy soybeans who now suddenly think, gosh, our government could be putting this tariff on, and now we can't afford to be in the way of that, so we're going to rush to Brazil. So as that happens, again, you have a big demand pull from Chinese companies going that way. What's everybody else going to do?
We will see in the coming weeks just how much leverage the U.S. does have in this situation, but it's not much ado about nothing, nor is it as dire as some may be putting out there. We'll see.
It's a large issue. Eric, you and I have talked about how the big issue with the U.S. probably has to do with intellectual property rights. Mm-hmm. And our ag products are the most accessible bargaining chips that the Chinese have to basically inflict signals and potential hurt back upon the U.S. And read a good analysis here recently that really neither country is in a position where they can just dismiss, the Chinese markets for commodity sales and for purchases are too important. China needs to be able to buy ag goods in the longer run. As we talked about, the numbers work out, they'll have to come to the U.S. either directly or, we hope not, indirectly. The next thing to watch for, if this were to go through, is the word transshipments. Transshipments would be one country buying from the U.S. and then turning around, charging a fee and selling to China. And given a $2.50 margin, that it looks like the economics could work out. So that would be the next thing. If we get to the end of May and for soybeans, that tariff stays, then you'd be wondering about those other issues.
Well, one would understand how this instability would cause a farmer to think about or maybe rethink their planting plans for this spring. If soybeans are going to take something of a hit, does corn now look more appealing if the producer is still on the fence as to whether this acreage is going to go to which crop?
When we talked about that a month ago, there weren't many Kansas farmers putting anything in the ground, but we're getting pretty close to that happening. And, of course, they're thinking about that over in the rest of the Corn Belt, too. The thing that you always wonder about is how much seed's been bought. What type of sunk costs do we have? Probably the judicious, prudent thing to say is that, on the margin, 1 or 2 million acres maybe, but not necessarily a 10 million acre shift or anything like that, unless you have a catastrophic outcome. If you did lose $2 or $3 in the soybean market, well then, maybe 2, 3, 4 million acres. But a lot of seeds getting returned and people scrambling to buy new seed of some other crop, corn, grain, sorghum, sunflower, something. When you look at the new crop soybean to corn ratio, as those markets were gyrating around, the advantage for soybeans dropped just a little bit, dropped about 2.51 as a ratio of November beans to December corn, had been about 2.55. So not
modest,
really a modest change. We're in a situation where, again, absent a drought and something else coming in, we haven't had enough of a game-changing situation, I don't think, quite yet, to have changed corn versus soybeans. But again, what we're thinking about is, again, what could happen. Well, probably that time of decision for us, we get to the end of May and the tariffs stick, and we haven't come up with a solution, then it's probably time to reevaluate all those decisions.
Well, in our limited remaining time, we haven't even brought up wheat yet. The condition of the winter wheat crop is still iffy, and the market is still paying some attention to that.
Yes, it's not as if Wheat is isolated from what's happening in these other crops, but concerns about the crop. We've heard worries about potential freeze damage coming up down in Oklahoma from weather systems, et cetera. All that's still on the table. Kansas Wheat Tour is out there first part of May, and we'll see where we stand when that group comes through and see what we have in the field.
Dan, it's been an intriguing week, to say the least, and next Friday we'll get together once again and see what more has come to the surface. Appreciate your time, as always.
Thanks, Eric. What interesting times.
Indeed. He's Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. His weekly segment on the grain price trends with us here on Agriculture Today. We'll be back in a moment on the K-State Radio Network.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
You're listening to Agriculture Today, and next up for you, a special guest to the Kansas State University campus this week and its plant pathology department. And she's achieved a number of impressive things in the area of plant science. She is from Cornell University, a plant breeder and geneticist, Sarah Davidson Evanega. And she's going to speak with us about a topic that really resonates throughout a great deal of agriculture, and that is how to communicate the attributes and the advantages of modern-day biotechnology for the food and fiber industry and how that's important to the public. Sarah, you are involved in something called the Cornell Alliance for Science. And that initiative, well, that's a unique one. Tell us about it.
That's right. So the Alliance for Science is an initiative that we launched in 2014. And our goal in the Alliance is really to promote access to innovations that will help promote food security, environmental sustainability, and global food security. And included among those innovations is agricultural biotechnology. So we have a real focus on trying to promote access and choice to biotechnology. So we're not necessarily promoting GMOs per se, but we believe that farmers should be able to choose whether or not they want to grow biotech crops, particularly farmers across the developing world who are already dealing with record-breaking heat, persistent drought, and a lot of not only abiotic stresses, but also new disease pressures that are coming in. And they need new tools to be able to deal with those new challenges. Fall armyworm right now has wreaked havoc across sub-Saharan Africa, and they need new solutions to be able to deal with those new pests that they've never seen before. In addition, we believe strongly that scientists need access to the tools that they need to innovate to address these big challenges. So if we sort of strip plant breeders from the tools that they need to innovate, then we aren't going to be able to improve agriculture. We're not going to be able to provide a better, more robust seed that's going to feed that 9 plus 10 billion people that are going to inhabit this planet, while at the same time reducing agriculture's negative impact on the environment. So we believe that access to these innovations is absolutely important, and that in this day and age when we have so many enormous challenges before us around global food insecurity, around a changing climate, we absolutely need to put all the tools on the table and spur innovation, not stymie innovation because of politics.
And you bring something interesting up, stymieing of that access to the scientific community. That's not talked of that much, it doesn't seem, but that's a real threat, you're saying.
Well, I would say if we look back over the last 20 years of biotechnology and the development of biotech crops, and we look at what's come out of our great U.S. land grant system, we have so many talented scientists in our land grant system across so many states. And despite that, we've only had one crop that's been developed through biotechnology reach the hands of farmers that's come out of the land grant system. And that's the Hawaiian papaya that's resistant to the ring spot virus that was developed for growers to benefit growers in Hawaii. And so, 20 years down the road, this tool has largely not been used by public sector researchers in this country or other countries around the world. Now, we may use these tools in the lab to better understand how plants work or the world around us, but we really haven't been able to use the tool to have impact on improved seed for farmers so that they can grow more using less resources.
So is the Alliance making inroads in getting that message and campaign across?
So what we do a lot of is we try to tell better stories about biotechnology so that people can understand the benefits and the impact that it's having or could have. Scientists aren't using the tools of genetic engineering for the sake of tinkering with nature. They're using it to solve real problems. So whether you're talking about a researcher at UC Davis, for example, Alison Van Enneman, who is part of a collaboration that's using the tools of biotechnology to essentially naturally dehorn cows. So these cows are born without horns, and that eliminates the procedure of dehorning, which is standard practice in dairies because it's important for animal welfare as well as farm worker welfare. And so, here we have a public sector researcher working with the tools of biotechnology to address an animal welfare issue. And so that's an interesting story that most people haven't heard about. I think it's also important for us to recognize that, in this country, we are relatively well-fed. We have access to an abundance of food. And that isn't true in all countries across the world. And in places like Uganda, where they rely for their main staple on a starchy cooking banana, that banana is being devastated by banana bacterial wilt. And bananas, of course, are very hard to breed using conventional means, and so you need a biotech solution, and there is a biotech solution. Researchers at the national program there have developed a resistant banana that's resistant to this banana bacterial wilt. They've taken a gene from sweet pepper and engineered it into banana, and that really could benefit tremendously farmers across Uganda as well as consumers who are often the same people in a country like Uganda. And so I think there may be hope that the technology will really be able to serve the farmers and consumers who it's meant to serve.
Back to the domestic side for a moment. You've likely thought about this before, how what you just said can be more effectively communicated to folks here in this country where food is abundant, it's plentiful, it's affordable, yet there are these unfounded fears about, for instance, GMOs. In fact, that's being used as a marketing ploy in the food sector now. Are there any tactics that come to mind that might be more effective in that kind of communication domestically?
Well, I think most people don't know that much about GMOs, but what we've been told from a lot of marketing is that we're supposed to be afraid of it.
Right.
And of course, every reputable scientific organization in the world has deemed them safe for the environment and safe for human health. And in fact, they also impart many benefits to human health when we see dramatic reductions in pesticide use. And so BT crops, for example, have brought about tremendous reductions in insecticide use. And they've also, the BT technology impacts a very narrow class of insects. And so the pesticides that it's replaced were much more broad spectrum. And so what we see is actually more wildlife coming back into our fields. So technology like that is great for farmer health. It's great for the environment. And frankly, it allows farmers to produce more food with less inputs. So that, trickles down to the consumer in the form of cheaper food. There was a study out a couple of weeks ago that projected, how much more we'll have to pay for our food if we go non-GMO. And in the case of salad oils and cooking oils, I think the projection was something like a 69% increase.
Wow.
So, do you want to pay 69% more for your food just to have it non-GMO if all of science deems GMOs safe and good for the environment? I don't.
And that's the kind of thing that needs to be presented to the public as regularly as possible.
That's right.
So you've accomplished a great deal in this field yourself. You've more on the plate. And what is your next direct endeavor?
So I'm really focused these days on helping equip and empower scientists and advocates for agriculture to be better communicators, to be able to go out there and share these wonderful stories of science with people. So we, I am at Cornell University. We're an educational institution, and so much of what we do is through training. We have short courses of a week, and we have another very deep 12-week program where we bring champions, people who care about agriculture, who care about addressing food insecurity in their country contexts, whether that be people from Hawaii, from Kansas, or from Tanzania. We bring them together to Cornell to do a really innovative program in science communication and science advocacy and outreach, and that's been very rewarding. So we thought, well, let's provide some training to farmers so that they can be more effective communicators. They are some of the most authentic and knowledgeable sources of information around something like GMOs. And so last year, we convened 40 farmers from 14 different countries, including the U.S., in the Quad Cities of Illinois and Iowa. So that's Rock Island, Illinois, next door to Moline, Illinois. And we did a science communication workshop for farmers, and it was just incredible to hear the stories from these farmers. And so it was a great success. And we're going to do the course again in May, again in the Quad Cities of Illinois and Rock Island and Moline. And it would be great to have some farmers from Kansas involved in that course. It was such a great, diverse group and really energizing. And how might a producer in our listening area be part of that? There's information somewhere handy, surely? Yeah, so if you go to our website, www.allianceforscience.cornell.edu. You can find ways to contact us there, or email us at allianceforscience@cornell.edu. Excellent. We're very easy to find on the internet. Sarah, great to have you here on the K-State campus and here in our studio to spend a few moments talking about a highly important topic to all of agriculture, including producers, and appreciate your time. Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to be here. Her name is Sarah Davidson Evanega, and she is an international professor of plant breeding and genetics at Cornell University. She was invited into the plant pathology department here at K-State to share thoughts on these matters, including that outreach that she speaks of, communicating biotechnology and the science behind it to the public at large and to international audiences where it is extremely valuable as well. You're listening to Agriculture Today. More after this over the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
Rounding out this Agriculture Today, our weekly stint on Kansas agricultural weather, and with us once more is Research and Extension climatologist out of K-State, Mary Knapp. And Mary, the question that's most prevalent this week, when will winter go away?
Well, it'll go away sometime, but we probably should remind people of last year and April 30th when we had our winter storm that dumped up to 14 inches of snow across parts of Kansas. We do have a snow in the outlook for tonight and then maybe again Saturday night into Sunday. Not anywhere near that magnitude of snowfall with it. They do have winter weather advisories out for southwestern Kansas, which is a change. They may actually see some moisture out of this. They're talking about 1 inch to 2 inches of wintry mix followed by snow. We'll see how much comes of that. Unfortunately, as it moves east, the likelihood of actually seeing measurable precipitation out of it goes down. They have a 30% chance in Manhattan for us to get some sort of snow overnight into tomorrow. A little bit better on the Saturday to Sunday system, but that one is also likely to be a little bit more on the warm side. It's going to start out with a wintry mix, but then switch into rain. So that would be encouraging. The unfortunate thing is the amount of moisture that is expected to be squeezed out of the system isn't really super high. There's a narrow band basically along the Arkansas River in southwestern Kansas where they're calling for maybe a quarter to half an inch. Outside of that band, we're looking at a tenth to a quarter of an inch, and that's what covers most of the state.
So this will not make much of a ding in our droughty conditions. There has been very little relief the last week or so.
Now, when we look at the last week, which ended as we feed it into the drought monitor, we end on Tuesday. So we look at the end of March and the first 3 days of April, and another very dry. The statewide average was only 0.09 of an inch. In western Kansas, it might be most notable in that they actually had measurable, not much, 1/100th of an inch, but it was not zero in any location. But our percent of normal, 12% statewide. The division that fared the best was the Southeast Division, but they only fared 41% of normal. And the other thing that's pretty noteworthy is before, if we had a dry week and we only had 1/100th of an inch, the deficit that we accumulated may have been 5/100ths or a tenth of an inch. We're getting up into more significant deficits every week. In the western areas, we're looking at 3/600ths to almost 4/10ths of an inch deficit for that week. In the eastern part of the state, we're still looking at a deficit of 4/500ths to a half an inch. So the amount that we expect to get on a daily or weekly basis is on its upslope, and it's very steep upslope. So the fact that we're expecting another dry week to start April is certainly not encouraging.
And this all means that the severity of the drought index is just that much more this week.
Right. There was a big jump in the amount of exceptional drought, which is the worst drought category that you can get. That on the border between the Southwest and the South Central Division expanded significantly. There was also some expansion in the moderate and severe drought. No contraction in the abnormally dry area, but we do still have pockets of that. In extreme northwestern Kansas, there's still a pocket that is basically drought-free, and there are some areas in the eastern part of the state, particularly along the Missouri border, where they are considered drought-free. And these are the areas that got significant rain at the end of March and to start out April. But again, those are very isolated, and it's not very widespread.
Mary, our corn growers are itching to plant in many quarters around Kansas. They're waiting for moisture. They're also awaiting an increase in soil temperatures, but those have surely stalled out with our cool conditions of late, haven't they?
Right. And again, there was a lot of consternation with our cold snap that we had on Wednesday. Mm-hmm. Temperatures down to 25 were recorded as far as southeast Kansas in the Columbus area. And that meant a number on our soil temperatures. If you go to the Mesonet website and check that soil page out, you can see in the chart, it'll show how that bounced downwards. There's been a little recovery, but we're still well below that 50-degree range that is optimal for corn development. And this weekend is not going to do anything to aid in warming those temperatures up. When you're looking at those temperatures warming up, it's not going to be just how warm it gets, because we've had some fairly significant temperatures, particularly in the southern and western parts of the state where we got up to 87. But it's going to be how warm do those nighttime lows stay. Encouraging news is as we go into next week, we're looking for highs in the 70s and lows in the 40s, and that will help address those cold soils and get them a chance to warm up. The other factor that comes into play with that is we really need to have a break in the cloudiness. It's been clear and warm out west, but we've had some persistent cloud cover in the eastern parts of the state, and that lack of sunshine also slows down that soil temperature warm-up.
So here we are, the 6th of April. Any change in the outlook for the balance of the month then?
Actually, yes. When we did the mid-March outlook, they were calling for fair chance for warmer than normal temperatures. That's gone away. The one that they've issued on the 31st of March calls for cooler than normal temperatures for most of the state. Not surprising, given at that point they could see this cold spell in the cards, and they're going, hey, wait a minute. If the first half of the month is running 10 to 12 degrees cooler than normal, there's not anything in the circulation patterns that would suggest a rapid warm-up, and that will leave the month at or maybe slightly cooler than normal.
Well, as they say, with each passing day, we're one day closer to a good rain, so we'll continue to wait. Mary, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
She's along with us each week to glance at the latest on the Kansas agricultural weather scene. Research and Extension climatologist here at K-State, Mary Knapp. And likewise, thanks to you for being along with us. Enjoy your weekend. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.